Hello everyone, Phobos here, coming at you with another discussion video, and this time we're going to be taking a look at the design manifesto that was posted on August 1st by GGG. As you can see, it's titled Balance Changes to Chill, Shock, and Charges, and we're going to be mostly focusing on the charges, specifically the power charges, and even more specifically than that, the nerf that just hit the charges, going from 50% increased crit to 40% increased crit, and that's going to be going live in 3.0 on Friday. So we're not going to be talking too much about the numerical values here, like the 10% reduced. Obviously, a nerf is a nerf, but it's not really a huge deal going from 50% crit to 40% crit. It's more, the reason why I wanted to make this video rather is more about the direction of crit in the future and where it's going. We've been seeing kind of a lot of nerfs in different forms recently, so I kind of wanted to just make a video, establish where I think GGG thinks crit is, where the community thinks it is, and then basically I'll respond to why I don't really see it needing any more nerfs or anything like that. So first, to establish where they think it's at, we can read this little line of text. As we still want to reduce the large value of critical chance players gain from this accessible resource. So right here, there's talking specifically about power charges, and how they're pretty easy to access, and for the ease of access, they give a little bit too much crit. Now, that's fine in isolation, but when we combine this with the previous post that they made, which was in response to the community uproar over the charge changes, then in that post they were talking about crit because they reduced the power charge from 50 to 30%. Originally, that was the goal, and the reason why they provided for doing that was because the community seemed to think that it was too easy to get crit. All builds were seemingly becoming crit in one way or another, and that it was just too easy to invest in crit, and you were, in some cases, builds were hitting insanely high crit values very easily, or even hitting the crit cap. And they basically agreed with that assessment, and hence they tried to make the nerf. The community outrage was the community was outraged, so they basically cut the nerf back a little bit, and they also took the frenzy charge nerf completely off the table. Everybody's happy again, but I think there's still something to talk about here in terms of the crit, and I really don't think crit is in that great of a spot, honestly. And basically the reason why is investment. It's not in a terrible spot, but it doesn't need to be continually nerfed, I guess is my point. So right here I basically made a tree, and it has all the spellcasting crit that you would get in the top portion of the tree that's reasonable to get. I didn't do an attacks version of this because attacks are generally, I feel like, going to have less crit unless you're going dagger, and if you're going dagger or you're going assassin, then you're investing super heavily into crit, and at that point you should just expect the builds to have a very high crit value, somewhere close to the crit cap. So no real need to go over those. This is going to be just more for generalized builds that are not either investing into one of those two areas. So the first thing I want to really point out here is the amount of investment into power charges. So there's 3 points here, 3 points here, and 3 points here. Now you can make some arguments that you don't need to take this node, but obviously it's super efficient to take if you're going to be running charges, so you kind of want that. You don't have to path through here, but charge duration is actually very good with power charges, especially on builds that don't have Skyforth, which is like a super GG item, and the need to keep the charges up by some other annoying method like Orb of Storms. So having a little bit of extra duration is good there. It's not bad to path through that way. And in this case right here, I'm counting the intelligence node because a lot of spellcasting builds probably won't be pathing this way. If you're playing an attack build and you're coming up through the other side or something, yeah, maybe this node isn't wasted because it's used for multiple things, but in the case of spellcasting nodes, this is pretty much 3 points right here to get this power charge, which makes it one of the worst ones to get. So basically 9 points, which is pretty substantial, just to get 150% crit. Keep that in mind. Then we have all the other point investments here, as you can see. And for this, we have an increased critical strikes gem, as well as a Void Scepter with 85% increased crit, and a Thorium Shield with 85% increased crit. We have a Diamond Flask here, don't have it on right now, but and when we put the Freezing Pulse in, we see we're around, I think it's 80%, is it? Yeah, 80% crit. I feel like we're missing something. Oh yeah, that's what it is. So initially I had the Righteous Providence on. So as you can see, 80%, 87% crit with all of this investment. Now, it seems like a lot of crit, and it is a lot of crit. It's 87% for Freeze Pulse and 76% for Flame Blast with the 5% base crit instead of the 6. Now, a couple things I just want to talk about right off the bat. We're probably going to want to remove this, realistically speaking, right? Because it's only going to happen on the first hit, and then you're going to get a better buff, but you're not going to have the crit, right? So we'll take out Righteous Providence. And then another thing, if we come into the items, is that you're probably not going to actually want crit on your weapon unless you have like a completely GG weapon, because you're going to want cast speed and crit multi first, because they just give way more damage in the vast amount of cases. So we'll remove the Void Scepter. Keeping the Titanium Shield is pretty reasonable because, you know, a lot of builds basically want a shield for shield charge. So you're probably going to be running some type of shield. Or you're going to be running like 2 daggers or something, which are crit based, which would give you approximately close to this 85% mark. Daggers are kind of the other exception with the weapon, because unless you're crafting them, essence crafting them with cast speed, they're not going to have cast speed. So obviously you'd want like crit multi, but even then, in most cases, you want attack speed for the shield charge, movement speed increase. So just something to keep in mind there. And when we take all this stuff out, we drop in crit fairly substantially, as you can see. Let's go back to the Freezing Pulse. So 73% crit and 64% crit. So this is a far more realistic amount, right? And it's still a decent amount of crit, but you have to realize that you're investing quite heavily for this crit. You have the 9 points invested in the power charges. You have full investment in crit in the tree, so that's basically like 4 points here, 4 points here, 4 points here, 5 points here, probably 4 points here because you could path a more efficient way, not going this way, for most builds at least. So quite a lot of points being invested. And we're investing in the gem on top of that. So this is actually taking up a slot in your 6 link. And as you know, there's a lot of powerful gems in the game today. So there's stuff like, you know, you could probably have something that does like 30% more plus in here. And instead we have the crit gem. And the crit gem gives more damage because it's a really good gem. It gives base crit and gives increased critical strike chance on top of that. So it's a great gem now after the buff. But we are still investing in crit with it, right? So with this large investment, I don't think 63% is like an absurd amount of crit to have. I think if you were like significantly below that, or even now, it seems like it's very difficult to hit anywhere near the crit cap, right? And that was one of the things that gets talked about a lot in these community posts about crit, is that, oh, it's so easy to hit the crit cap. I mean, it's really not easy to hit the crit cap, practically speaking. Of course, you can create like a path of building scenario with either GG gear or you know, using specific types of gear only to hit the crit cap. But realistically speaking, if you want to have a functional build, well-balanced build in terms of defenses and offense, then it's not that easy to hit anywhere near the crit cap without Dagger or Assassin. So let's just bring up Freezing Pulse again. Yeah, so decent values. Now I think where this misconception comes in, that's easy to get a lot of crit, this is kind of going to be the last part of the video, comes from 2 things, Assassin and Diamond Flask, right? So if you take Assassin, even in its nerf state, you're going to be able to get a ton of crit. And you're going to be able to push a lot of things easily to the crit cap, basically. In a lot of cases, you're actually going to have to take crit out of the tree at least a little bit, so you're not wasting crit by going Assassin, or at least that's how it was before. I haven't really simmed too much with the new Assassin. So I think that's where part of this comes in, is that there's always the option to go Assassin and hit crit cap, right? So it seems like there's this illusion of like, oh, well, you can hit crit cap so easily, but you're giving up damage in other areas by taking crit, right? Because crit is not the only source of damage. if you go over to something like Inquisitor, going Inquisitor, you're taking 30% cast speed, 30% spell damage, 16% more elemental damage, 45% crit multi, and then you're ignoring resistances on crit. So something like Inquisitor, honestly, kind of smashes Assassin in its current state because you can already get a just getting to the crit cap isn't really enough, right? And Deadly Infusion is really the only node that you're benefiting from significantly, because Ambush and Assassinate don't really synergize very well with Deadly Infusion, because in most cases with Deadly Infusion you wind up with so much crit that you don't really need the more crit chance from Assassinate and Ambush. This is basically just pushing you to the cap if you weren't there already, right? And you were probably pretty close to the cap with Deadly Infusion by itself. So yeah, investing in Assassin, it is definitely an easy way to get crit, but it's not necessarily the best way to build the character, right? Raider is probably still a lot stronger, and things like Inquisitor is stronger, Berserker is stronger, either for utility reasons or just for outright damage reasons in the case of like Elementalist and Inquisitor. And the other thing that's probably creating this misconception is the Diamond Flask. So obviously if you're taking your Diamond Flask crit value, then you're a lot closer to crit cap, right? We're 87% the Diamond Flask on Flame Blast and 92% with the Diamond Flask on Freezing Pulse. So now that is certainly a lot of crit, and I can understand the confusion that's coming up here, but you have to remember that you're using a flask, and honestly the flask is pretty overpowered, in my estimate at least. As you can see how much we're gaining from not having it to having it. So again, this is kind of like a case where if you want to nerf something, the best thing to nerf is probably the flask, realistically, not the actual crit values itself. And I feel like this happens a lot in this game, where they'll just nerf, if you want, like, you want to nerf crit, so obviously you're trying to like chip. What they do is they do like a very roundabout way of nerfing things. They'll try and chip away at like a couple of the pieces that will make crit good, but they won't actually get to the heart of the issue, which really is like the Diamond Flask itself, right? And I feel like that was done with like Vol Spark in a lot of ways, where before it kind of got its death blow dealt in this most recent beta, I guess, yeah, in the beta, it was being nerfed in a lot of roundabout ways, and it was kind of like every patch it would come back, and you could predict it would come back because they never really nerfed anything about the skill that would just hamper its ability to be played. So they just kind of nerfed like maybe the top end damage or something like that by nerfing crit in some way or something. So yeah, I think that's what's happening again here. Real culprit is either Assassin or Diamond Flask, and with the Assassin it's a huge investment. So daggers also could be a culprit, but again, you're investing heavily by using a dagger, and you have to get all the dagger crit nodes, which are pretty efficient, but there's still extra nodes you have to take. So that's pretty much my thoughts on this. Again, not like a huge deal in the state that it is, but I think we're kind of going in the wrong direction. And if you want to nerf crit in the future, look into Diamond Flask. So that's going to be it. Thank you guys for watching, and see you later.